in the group comma, you have probably the only respected organisation representing monetary reform in the world. And that is something to be very proud of, and also should drive you to support that group. They are accredited economists. They are capable of standing their ground against the professionals who refuse to even contemplate the issues that we're raising. Monetary reform isn't a new issue. This is not a few people with alternative ideas about economics coming forward saying, what's wrong about free trade, what's wrong about globalization. These ideas have been around, in fact, pre the 1930s. Students of history will know that the banking controversy, the currency question, the gold issue, money lending, goldsmiths, this has been a recurrent feature of economic and political debate really since the Middle Ages. And it all comes down to a single question. This matter of the medium of exchange which you and I, businesses, commerce, must use to exchange the goods and services that they produce for each other, on what terms is that medium of exchange, money, going to be available? Now, you've heard a lot about debt. You might be interested in a few statistics. Now, I don't have the ones for Canada. You'll have to find those out for yourselves. And there are people who can do this, and it's not hard to get these statistics. But for the UK, we have a national debt of £400 billion. We have mortgages of £420 billion outstanding, and commercial debts of around £300 billion. Now that's round about £1,100 billion. We have a money stock of £740 billion. We don't have the money to pay off the debts registered against the economy. And this is typical. We in the UK are frequently told that this is because we're a poor country, we're not competitive, we can't match up to the Germans, the Japanese, etc., etc. But America, that poor country south of your border, has a national debt of $5.6 trillion. Mortgage debts outstanding of $4.8 trillion. And massive commercial debts. And they are incapable of paying their debts off. Mortgage debts, commercial debts, government national debts, all of them show an identical pattern in every country, which is one of continual escalation. A slope upwards, no sign of them being repaid. Why is it that every country in the world is so significantly in debt? I mean, if everyone's in debt, who owes who? And what about the third world? They've got debts, international debts, as well as the sectoral debts. They have international or third world debts totaling $2.2 trillion. And we're trying to find ways to advise them to get out of their problems. We are advising them on how to handle debt. We invented this debt-based financial system. The astonishing thing is that we're taking third world debt in complete isolation and saying, oh, we seem to have a small problem of debt here, let's have a look at it. On its own. I mean, what are we saying to them? Work hard and one day your debt will be as small as America's, a mere $5.6 trillion. The reason, of course, that the world is so heavily in debt is that the process of going into debt is relied upon to create and supply money. In the UK, when I'm doing talks like this, I just quote the statistic that we have a money stock of £740 billion at the present, constantly going up, as I've explained, and then explain to people that of that £740 billion, government figures show that £25 billion has been created by the Treasury, by the government. Now, where does the other £715 billion come from? And then I ask people, in that delightful rhetorical way you can when you're on a platform, put your hand up if you've got a mortgage. And of course nobody ever does because they're too embarrassed. The whole point is that the other £715 billion is the product of debt. And if you have a mortgage, congratulations, because you're supporting the money stock. Now this is very important. Monetary reform, and I don't really want to do down the introducers here, but monetary reform is not simply a matter of improving government accounts. It is not a matter of making the Bank of Canada or the UK government's books look a little bit rosier. Monetary reform is far more penetrating and important than that, and it affects you and your status. I did some research into UK mortgage statistics, and I managed to go back. The records are a bit incomplete, pre-1960, but I went back to 1960. And again, somebody should do this work for Canada. Everybody accepts mortgages as a legitimate way of buying a house. If you haven't got the money to buy a house, how convenient, there's a bank or building society who will lend it to you. Well, that's marvellous. But you might be interested to know that from 1960 to 1996, the proportion of privately owned houses in the UK that were owned outright without a mortgage dropped from 50% to 35%. The total number of mortgage properties in the UK rose from 3.3 million to nearly 11 million, rising from less than 20% to nearly 50% of the housing stock. The average debt on a mortgage went up from 1 times the annual income to over twice the annual income. In other words, if you went back in time 40 years ago, if you have a mortgage, you would have had one then half or less than half of what it is now. And then the debt-based money supply system had been operating for decades. What I'm trying to tell you is that the size of your mortgages are wholly and utterly illegitimate. Not that the institution itself is wrong, but it's been inflated. And it's been inflated in a very interesting way. In that period from 1960 to 1996, the amount of money that the government created went down from 20% to 3%. The amount of money that banks and building societies created went up from 80% to 96%.
Is that legal tender or crash?
I'll say again, the amount of money that government created went down from 20%, and that was legal tender, coin and note, down to 3%. The amount that banks and building societies supplied went from 80% up to 96%. So at the same time as governments were producing less and less money to support the economy, you were being allowed to borrow more and more and more. Building societies were allowed to offer 100% mortgages, no deposit, for longer terms. And that's simply the opportunity to allow a population the collective right to compete up houses, compete up their prices, to the point where you get deeper and deeper into debt. Now, let me give you a little quote from the same period of time as the William Mackenzie King quote, to give an idea of the seriousness of monetary reform. There was a very famous economist and banker whose quote I've lost temporarily. I shall remember it if I can't find it, called Lord Josiah Stamp. I can't find it, so I shall quote it from memory. And he said, "Banking was conceived in iniquity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take the power of money away from them. Take their property away from them, but leave them with the power to create money, and with the stroke of a pen they will buy the World Bank. If you want to be slaves and pay the cost of your own slavery, then let the banks create money." Now that was the 1930s, when monetary reform was very much alive.